I think that we now have a quorum.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hello, Andrea.
Sorry, I was jumping on from a previous meeting and do not have my ducks in a row, but I do now. So welcome, everybody. Why don't we go ahead and get started? It's 11:01. And does anybody, it's nice to see you all. Does anybody have any adjustment to the agenda? Seeing none, we will go forward with the agenda that we have. I invite any public comment. And I'm sorry, Andrea, I hope you're feeling better.
And so I don't see anyone from the public, Amy, but there are folks from GMT, including our friends, I'm guessing Dan and Corey and Mari from FGI. So I just wanted to check to make sure that they don't have a public comment. Okay.
Thanks for being here, y'all. Okay, no public comments, so we will move on to approving the committee minutes from December 9th.
I move they be approved as circulated.
Thanks, Paul. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining? I think we all had the votes. Okay, so the minutes are approved. I'm getting my notebook out here. All right, so now we move on to discussion about legislative activity. And I know that both Nick Grayson and Clayton have been very busy indeed with all of that. So I will pop that over to you and look for my pen.
So absolutely, it's been a busy session so far, and I could tell you that well, right off the bat was really surprised that the transportation committees wanted testimony so soon when it came to our rural transfers, and so we were in there early, and I'm getting a little bit of ahead of myself though. Um, so we've been into Senate Transportation to talk about the rural transfer. We have not yet been to House Transportation to talk about it. We are expecting to be in House Transportation next week, where we'll provide our overview and our, where we're at with the big questions. And so, for one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit here, with our next topic is our June service modification and reductions. And but right now, I would say that we are in alignment with the governor's budget. This would have us need to reduce another 500,000 worth of service, which is painful, but I think considering what we were previously looking at is is tolerable. I think that one of the things that we want to make sure is that we see that the challenge for us is not in fiscal year 26, but in fiscal year 27. And that one of the items that we can discuss is, whether we want to actively seek additional funds in fiscal year 26. I have a feeling that it's in our best interest not to, and to stay in alignment with the governor's budget, but we can talk about that. We continue to be sort of in alignment with VTrans when it comes to the rural transfer, and that we are going through the process. We are answering technical questions and doing our due diligence. I will say that we are starting to get some questions, and they seem to be focusing on what is happening with Franklin County. And so it's going to be really interesting to me in the coming weeks if we see any legislators start to voice opposition to transfer because of the union situation. But my impression is so far is that we are that there's enthusiasm for the transfer. One of the things that we will talk about when we do our overview is that our new fare system and how it is meeting its financial goals, and has not seen the dip in ridership that we had been worried about with returning to fares. And then lastly, I'll say that the primary concerns that I've been getting from legislators since I've been down there has to deal with service for the town of Essex. And I can tell you that the majority leader, Representative Lori Houghton, who represents Essex, is very concerned about that service going away. And that seems to be the sort of focus of concern on additional service reductions at this time. So again, as an overview, we're going in next week, showing our alignment with the administration. It's going to be very much sort of present and future focused instead of, sort of looking backwards. I think that we'll be prepared to answer some questions, about previous appropriations. I know that during some of the testimony that's happened so far, that there's been some concerns raised about previous funds that, GMT has received. And so I'm sure that we'll be asked about that. But by and large, we're going to be focused on, now and ahead, and not looking back as much as possible. So I will say that the Ncrason has been exceptionally helpful. I think that they are good at, like I have a check-in with them every Monday morning, and what they are really valuable to me is when I, say, hey, we're thinking about, talking about X, Y, and Z and testimony, and they can say, hey, that is great, but keep in mind that this is where, legislators may have sort of related concerns and so I think that they've been really helpful for us in avoiding, potential landmines, and also just expressing, where they think that legislators and committees would like us, to move towards. So that has certainly been very helpful. And we'll turn it over now for you all with any types of questions. And but I will say that I'm pleasantly, happy with how things are going with the session. Certainly happy with the administration's increased funding for us, and I am happy that met with Representative Walker, and he seemed very eager to cooperate with us, and to sort of have a reset on our relationship with him. So by and large, happy with how things are progressing this session.
What do y'all think?
Couple questions, Amy. One is, you think Essex reps will be satisfied with the return of the number 2 circulator? Will that solve their concern?
I believe that it will. I think that the primary concerns that I've heard from the Essex legislators are, service within Essex, and less about the connection to Williston. One of the things that you'll hear from Chris in our next session is that, again, we're trying to, sort of look at the routes more, each of the sections. And, we're seeing that about 70% of the ridership currently on the number 10 is, folks that are connecting within the 2 Essex communities. And so therefore, we would be sort of going where the rides are and moving away from where the rides, haven't been. But I do think, Paul, that the Essex reps will be, I don't know if I would say fully satisfied, but I think that they'll be, relieved.
Now, will it be possible for that circulator to indirectly connect with Williston at Amtrak or some other place in Essex Junction? timely?
I think that potentially that, will certainly, there will be overlap with the number two, so that somebody would be able to take the circulator and then jump on the two. One of the ideas that we're looking at for fiscal year, for changes later in fiscal year 26, is potentially having the number one and the number two be connected with a larger circulator. And that would then, provide a connection between Essex Five Corners and Amtrak and Williston. Um, But at this time, if we were to eliminate the Williston portion of the 10, for somebody in Essex to get to Williston, they would have to go into to downtown. They wouldn't necessarily have to go all the way to the DTC, because they could probably, get off at the hospital and then, walk over to pick up the one. But it certainly would not be as convenient as now.
The other question I have is it seems like these are Band-Aids, they're helpful Band-Aids. They help the immediate pain, but is there anything further on trying to get some permanent funding before the legislature?
So I can tell you that Senator Chittenden has introduced legislation that would create a dedicated funding source for transit through an additional car registration fee. It would be a scalable fee, so that it would be a higher registration fee depending on the value of the car. I'm very bad at predicting the future. I don't really see an appetite for that, or think that that it's going to be able to, that there will be a pathway to override what I would expect to be a governor's veto. I can tell you that I've, expressed in the past, that we may need to look at sort of a Chittenden County solution for a Chittenden County problem, and perhaps have that fee, apply just to folks in our service area. But I'm not sure. That sort of creates its own, set of concerns, and is also not going to address sort of the rural challenges that the other providers are going to have. So, I don't know. I just think that that's a very uphill, battle, that legislation.
Thank you.
I have a couple comments. One is, in addition to Senator Chittenden's proposal, I think one of the Williston reps asked if there were any other proposals that she should be looking at on our behalf. And I think I haven't gotten back to her yet, and I would like to. So there's one. And I'm just going to say that I so appreciate restoring bits and pieces of the 10 and connecting Essex and Essex Junction. But I'm a little concerned about Williston. Because without the 10 and reduced frequency of the 1 and no village circulator, Williston still benefits from folks coming into Williston and being able to go to downtown. But we've then become more of a kind of almost a commuter route, right? Anybody who lives outside from Williston who wants to take has to drive into Taft Corners or walk, as the case may be for me. But I just want to say it out loud. Williston wants very much to be supportive of GMT, and they're not grumbling. But I want to acknowledge that they're losing quite a bit.
And even though we are not going to be making changes to the number 1 and the 11 to create the 15-minute corridor as part of our June service, as we had originally, thought we would recommend, that still is something that, we'll probably do within the next year. And so you're absolutely right, Amy, that Williston will, really take a bulk of the reductions.
Yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I said that. Go ahead, Russ.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just want to share our perspective as we're currently communicating to the legislature, not only for 26, and as everyone knows, we operate on this, one budget year at a time structure, and it doesn't really help. But for us, what we're trying to do is get through 26 with some additional funds in the budget for GMT Urban, and see once the applications come through, if we have any carbon reduction program funds, which can be used like congestion mitigation and air quality funds, can be used for capital, operations, admin, those types of things, to see what we can do to bridge or meet a portion of that $1.2 million gap that's on the books now. Even though we had a $3.5 million budget item for urban for 25, we were able to come up with 4.1 million. Same as every other year before then, as we're generally off budget on the urban, because that's where the need's been, and that's not unusual to make those year-to-year decisions. But for us, what we're saying to the legislature is, on the rural side, we have 13 underperforming routes, and we need to really look at those to see if we can bend that cost curve down, make those adjustments, very similar to what GMT Urban has been doing and what the rural folks have been doing since COVID. And then bridge the gap as best we can in 26, and then show what we've done in the rural area, what we've done in the urban area, and then ask for more money for the 27 to see if we can't find a new post-COVID, post-inflation, normal, ongoing, predictable level of funding. That could be in the $54 million range rather than the $53 million range where we are today. In addition to that, just wanted to shout out to Chris Damiani for agreeing to meet with Dan Courier and Steve Fauble on a regular basis to assess and to keep us updated on the potential route changes in the urban area. What I'm asking for is to see what those levels of reductions would mean to your stick factors. If we're going to make cuts and it's going to reduce your stick factors by 1 or 2 factors, that's $1.2 million or so. What I'm hoping to do is use those type of considerations and scenarios to further justify additional funds in 27 and beyond. Certainly, that's something that we're looking at closely. So all that with the transitions of the rural routes, hopefully saving us a couple $100,000 can get us to a sustainable way forward. I just wanted to share, how we anticipate to work with GMT and understanding that we've got a lot of work to do after we get through this FY26 budget.
Thank you. There's other comments on our legislative activities. Now's the time. Otherwise, we'll move on to the June service modification conversation.
Austin, have you picked up anything that you want to share with us about GMT and the legislature?
Nothing that hasn't already been shared. I think generally there's just, quite the sea change down there, if we're being frank. I think the erosion of the two supermajorities in the House and Senate have taken some folks off guard and just kind of meant a slow, contemplative start to the session where a lot of things that were taken as granted are not. I think that folks are looking at competing interests, and one thing I'm highlighting for folks and some of my agita around this session is the potential for a late session surprise as federal funding negotiations are going on in DC. The Republicans are currently in an intra-party strife between the House and the Senate, where they have two different methods to move forward with funding the federal government funding set to expire March 14th. So we could be looking at a potential shutdown then. It's about the only leverage the Democratic Party has at a national level in DC is the government funding. But depending on what they go with, there's a reconciliation package the House has been playing with that's about $2 to $3 trillion in cuts to the federal budget. That could probably trickle through to be about a 10% reduction in federal funding to the state. Not saying that'll all be transportation funding. That actually might be one of the safer piles, but there's a lot of conflicting needs there, as that would involve massive Medicaid cuts, education cuts, and SNAP benefits, et cetera. So that's kind of some of my anxiety around the coming, the end of the session, if you will. So, folks are, like I said, taking it slow, being contemplative, and waiting to some extent.
Thank you. Thanks for the perspective. And let's continue forward with the conversation about June service modifications and reductions.
I'll turn this right over to Chris.
Welcome, Chris.
Morning, everyone. So I'm just going to go over sort of what Clayton has outlined in the read ahead around the service reductions. As folks know, the original deficit that we were facing was the 1.2, and sort of with some of the other numbers coming in, that deficit is now in the neighborhood of 500,000, which certainly makes it a lot easier for us when trying to think about, what service we're proposing to either cut, reduce, or change. And I just wanted to highlight again, a lot of these changes are still, we're really trying to impact the least amount of people of our current riders as we go through these multiple rounds of service cuts. And so, the first one on the list is really going through a reduced frequency in the 8 weeks for the summer, where we see ridership pretty much decrease. In some places, ridership goes from like on the 1 and the 2, from 30,000 rides a month in the summer to over almost 60,000 rides, so almost doubling. But we still operate the same level of service. And so with this summer schedule that we're looking to propose starting in June, we're saying for 8 weeks of the summer, we'd operate 30-minute service on sort of our 4 core routes, the 1, 2, 6, and 7, and return back to sort of the 20-minute service all day that we operate on the 1 and the 2 and the rest of the year. And then the peak service that we operate on the 6 and the 7 for the other 9, 10 months out of the year. The other changes that we're looking to make are on Sundays. So that's also what we talked about, I think, back at the board retreat, was creating a new North End sort of circulator route by combining the number 8 and the number 7 on Sundays to be every 90 minutes, and then creating a South End circulator loop, combining the number 5 and the number 6 to be every 90 minutes on Sundays. The other change on Sundays that we're looking to implement is eliminating the number 11 completely just on Sundays. This route, when looking at where folks are going on that route, a by and far large majority of folks are going to places that they can access on the existing number 1, which runs every 30 minutes on Sundays. So we're looking to shift folks onto that route there. Some of the other changes we're looking to make in June are adjusting the number 8 city loop. So currently it operates every 30 minutes on weekdays, and we're looking to reduce that to every 60 minutes, going to both Macaulay Square and Fernhill, as the board approved similarly for Saturday service on the number 8 previously. And then finally, looking at the 10, the 10 has a lot of things with this route. One of the things the route performance report did highlight, again, that this particular route has been underperforming for, I think it was the 8th or 9th year in a row. We are trying again to move folks where they currently are riding. And as Clayton mentioned, I just wanted to adjust one of the terminologies. It's 70% of the activity, so that's boardings and alightings. So people getting on and off the bus are happening within the sort of Essex town area, Essex Junction area. And the other 30% of activity is happening for folks going between Amtrak and Williston. And so with that, we're looking to propose moving that service to basically be the old number 4, which ran in the morning from 6:30 to 8, and then from 3 o'clock to 6 in the afternoon every 30 minutes. And so one of the things we see here is that we're going to be able to retain the ridership where a majority of that ridership is, and probably actually help increase that, because right now, when we combined the number 10 and the number 4 to sort of this every 75-minute loop that we have, it worked pretty well at the beginning of the pandemic when we did it. The Essex School District had school times that worked with that schedule. They had since adjusted their school times because of their own transportation challenges. And so what we're seeing right now is folks are utilizing the bus. A lot of folks are Essex students are utilizing the bus to utilize that route in the afternoon, but the timing doesn't work great in the morning, and the way that that route is scheduled, it's impossible for us to sort of rejigger the schedule to make it work on both ends. And so by going to this route, we really will see that, you know, the timing will work out a lot better, that folks, particularly in Essex Town, will be able to, students in particular, will be able to get to Essex Junction as well. And, you know, also during the public hearings, we did hear from a lot of folks, non-students, folks who live out in the Sand Hill neighborhood, out in Essex Town, who still want to be able to access connections to other routes, such as the number 2 to get into Burlington and so forth. So that was some of our thought process facing the $500,000 deficit number that we're looking for 26. And then also, you know, Clayton put in the read ahead some other things that we are looking for later in FY26, but there's still some more stuff that we need to work through on our end as we look through, you know, adjusting the service on the 1 and the 11 on weekdays to match where folks are going, and then some other smaller changes, such as extending the number 9 to Colchester, and extending the number 2 on Saturdays to the Essex Experience, recognizing since the changes that went into effect back in December, that did eliminate, you know, that eliminated service to Essex Experience from Essex Junction. And, you know, so right now we'll be previewing some of this to the board in February with board approval, final board approval for this particular phase at the March board meeting. Happy to answer any questions.
I'm going to continue to say how much I appreciate all the thought that is going into all of this, and recognize that even though I was whining about Williston having reduced service, I understand all of what's going on, and the Williston to Essex number 10, there's very few people on it. And so although I recognize the potential, the reality is it's not being utilized. And so I understand all that. I also really appreciate the opportunity for young people to use our city buses, our GMT buses for school. It gets vehicles off the road at that really busy time of day, but also helps young people become regular bus riders. And I think that is an immense benefit, that those people will have that confidence to use our bus system and other bus systems for life. So I think there's an outsized benefit there. And the only other question I had about the 11, and I don't keep all the routes in my head, but the 11 is the one that goes to the airport, correct?
That's correct.
So the Sunday, is it one of those destinations
Yep, so
that Sundays make
exactly,
sense?
exactly. So, you know, it will no longer go to the airport. There, you know, I will say there, I'm not saying it's a great option, but on the number 1, it is about a quarter mile, third of a mile walk from Wilson Road on the number 1 to the airport. Not great, especially at this time of the year. But those are the choices that we're sort of having to face. And like I said, a far majority of the ridership is basically folks who are going to the U-Mall essentially, or Target on Sundays. And so that, you know, the number 1 serves all that there.
Yeah, thanks. Other comments, questions? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then we will move on. So something that I have put on our agenda is some strategic planning, which I really appreciate the way that's worded. That makes me laugh. Susan Grasso is such a smart individual, and she keeps talking about, like, let's have our, you know, how do we make these decisions if we don't have a strategic plan to match that up? And I do appreciate that. Long ago, when I joined the board, we were in the middle of this kind of strategic plan, and we had this great work plan, and we divvied it up, and it was organized and helps. I suck at strategic planning, but wanted our leadership team to kind of take ownership of that and move that along. And then I will admit that I not only do I suck at it, but I don't know how to get it started. So I am asking you all as my leadership team to kind of figure out how do we get that going. Paul, you're muted.
I'm sorry. We do have a strategic plan now, so it might be one way to start to get that circulated so we can kind of see what one looks like and what it currently is. And we may find that a lot of that has applicability going forward, and we will quickly see those areas that we need to dig into some more.
Do we know where this document is located? I'm pretty confident I do not have it in my files anywhere.
I think I've got one kicking around here somewhere.
I think we have this saved that we can send to the board, but it hasn't been updated in a number of fiscal years.
So why don't we start, Jamie, if you could
Yeah.
find it, if we could add this to our March agenda for this team, and if we could send it out before that and review it and see what we got and where we want to go from there. I think that's a fair place to start. Austin, you have thoughts?
No, I agree with Paul. I think circulating what we have as a starting place is a good move. I also just think, strategic plans are great, but the need for dexterity is, and just, I think back to some of our pandemic era times when folks were really focused on fare free, and because that was kind of a strategic goal of the organization. And I think some of our decision making around fare free might have been a little myopic. So I would just always urge that, we have to think about the long term and be willing to adjust long term goals, based off of other realities.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Clayton, were you going to say something?
No, I'm sorry, I just came back. I had to depart quickly, or for a quick second.
That's okay. All right. So that's where we're going to start. We'll review what we have. And I appreciate working in flexibility, but I do think that, we've had to go through some values exercises in order to kind of assess what we want to do with these routes and what do we want to reduce. And I think in Susan's request, it's an opportunity to have some of those values stated and clear so that we can continue to make those decisions.
Yeah, I've brought up in the past, past usage of like multi-criterial decision analysis tools, which are kind of wonky. I'm sure Susan has in her time, just because they're kind of a planner's thing. But looking at those core values and kind of rating how important those core values are to us, and then analyzing plans going forward based off those would be important. I think going back to like conversations around fare free, like we had conversations about values and marginal utility and all those things, but I don't think those came through clearly once we got into the decision making. So yeah.
Okay. If you have examples of those tools, feel free to dust them off and we'll incorporate that into our conversation. Okay. I'm comfortable leaving this topic for now. Are you all? Okay.
Amy, one of the things that we have coming up is a meeting with Bob to discuss the workforce committee, and with him being the previous strategy committee chair, may be an opportunity for us to engage with him as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
I can say one thing to consider, that this will be a heavy lift for staff. This is not something that the board can do by itself. And so hopefully staff has the bandwidth to, with all the other things that are going on, to dive into this.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think I'm not, there's no, excuse me, huge time crunch on this. So we can certainly just start having discussions and looking. And certainly, it's already feels like, where the legislative session is up and running, right? And that always ends before we know it. So I don't think we have a time crunch to get it done during legislative session or anything like that. I certainly want to balance that. So I appreciate that, Paul. Okay. All right. So I want to move on. One of the things that, Clayton, has it been 2 whole years that you've been with GMT?
Yes, 2 years and a month today.
And well, happy 2 years plus 1 month.
Thank
One of the things that I've been thinking about for quite some time, but not acted on is, we haven't reviewed Clayton officially. And as we go through all these changes, and, one of the things, I think we have a writer who likes to email everybody daily with really negative things, specifically about Clayton. But I think it's really important that we review Clayton's work and have that on file, so that so that we have that on file and nobody can say, well, nobody had anything to say, good or bad, and so I want to have that conversation. And so that would be an executive session conversation, because it has something to do with personnel matters. And so I'm wondering whether somebody would like to kind of move forward with that process. I think Clayton sent some suggestions in the read ahead.
And I think that the decision point for you all is whether you want this to be a private conversation amongst board members at this time, or whether you would like, me present.
Thanks, Russ.
I think that since this is the opening discussion, I think it might be best if Clayton were not here. I think once we get some items in mind that we want to talk over with Clayton, it would be appropriate for him to be involved. But that's just my take on it.
Okay. But would we want Stephanie here? Or do we want just a private conversation to get ourselves a direction?
I don't know if Steffi could be helpful, but I mean, we have had tools that we've used in the past. And so that may be one place that we need to dig into, or is that really something for, was it workforce that would be the proper committee to kind of lead this one, or do you want this committee to do the whole process?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. In the past, Austin, do you know whether we did it through leadership?
It's typically been leadership. We haven't exactly had a workforce committee. It's been the job of the chair. Something I didn't do in my time because we didn't have a general manager for part of it. We were hiring, and then we had a new general manager, and then we did our strategic analysis with a consultant. And so we kind of did a supplemental review on top of that, and much of that involved a review of Clayton and his performance and to date. So it's something we haven't done in some time. I think it'd be great to pull Stephanie into a executive session if that's the choice we go with today, just so we can have some of her perspective. I think in the past, the review of the general manager has been its own entirely own process that didn't necessarily look like how we were reviewing other employees. So I think that might be nice to kind of align a little bit better, understanding we have to do some supplemental things, such as sort of reaching out to external partners and whatnot to review our general manager. But I think you're right, Amy. I think we do need to do a review just to have one on record, if nothing else, and to point to that. Yeah, I do think it might be a worthwhile conversation, because we do have this workforce committee now, to have at least the chair of that committee involved and have some input from them. If not, while still letting the leadership committee move forward with the actual, and the chair specifically move forward with the actual review with the general manager.
Okay. I will say that Bob is the chair of the workforce, and he's part of this committee. And I did many months ago ask Stephanie for like, hey, how do we do this before? And she did send me what we had done with John, right? So we do have a little bit of record, and she did send it to me, and I just sat on it for a long period of time. So I guess the question right now is, did we just say that we want to move forward and we'll undergo it, or do we want to go into executive session to talk more details?
So I'm already off mute. I don't necessarily see a need to go into executive session unless there's something specifically you want to discuss and more guidance is needed. I'd be comfortable with, you know, you bringing forth just a proposal about how you'd like to go through with this and maybe consult with Bob offline. And then we can go through it in the next, our next leadership committee, maybe go into executive session, go through the criteria and what the steps are going to be, and then start it after that. That's just my initial thought.
Maybe if we get a copy of the tool we used previously, it'll give us a jumping off point.
Okay.
And
All right.
certainly if there is any self-assessment that you would like me to do, whether it's open-ended or addressing specific items, I'm happy to do whatever would be helpful.
Okay. So, Stephanie, maybe you would help and just resend me the tool. No, I haven't. Do not do that. I will send it out. I will talk with Bob, and I will see what the process might look like. I will also share that on top of strategic planning, not being my forte, I have never supervised anybody besides myself. So open to your expertise in doing this effectively. And I'll state one more time that I want to do this because I want to make sure that we document that we're, at least I'm very pleased with what we're doing and what Clayton's doing. And if ever someone were to say, Clayton's not doing a good job or GMT's not doing a good job, I don't want that to not be part of the record. So that's my motivation. And Clayton, I want you to know that. So I will do some homework between now and we will add this like strategic planning. We'll keep this on the agenda and keep moving forward. Does that sound reasonable?
Sounds good, Amy. I'll just throw in there that, yes, it's nice to have something on record to prove that we're doing our due diligence. But I think more importantly is that conversation between the board and the general manager. He will be evaluating us as well. How are we reacting or interacting with him? That'll be an important piece of it. And I've always found in the past that the person being evaluated should get something out of the process that will even some new goals and objectives that might be helpful.
Great.
I would like a
Okay.
waffle party or finger catchers for anyone who's watching Severance.
I have not.
Okay.
All right. So that was the last major thing on our agenda. And so the last thing, unless anybody else has anything to add, is our commissioner comments. Of which I hear none, and I've certainly made my comments known throughout, so I don't have anything additional to add. So we get 15 minutes back in our day, as long as somebody's going to move to adjourn.
Also move.
Thank you, Paul.
I'll second.
Thanks, Austin. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. There was no opposition or no one abstaining, so we are adjourned. Andrea, I hope you feel better. It was nice to see all of you, and thanks for all the great work.
Thank you, everybody.